everyone, and welcome to Janet's Craft Corner. Today we're going to be making the Baking Spirits Bright Shelf Sitter. This goes with several other Baking Spirits Bright pieces that you can coordinate with, and they're all listed in the description, so please feel free to look at all of those as you get the chance. As always, you can see here the items that you need to help complete this kit, including the paint colors that are listed in the description below. So let's get started. Now I've actually kind of already started. As you can see, I've already done my white. I kind of got ahead of myself, as is kind of usual. So sorry about that, but yeah, there you go. Now let me adjust that just a little so you can see the whole thing. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and go from there. So I always do my white first because sometimes it needs extra coats, and I don't like to have to come back and do that while I don't have to sit around waiting for it to dry if it needs those extra coats. So let's get some red paint here. This is pretty much, and it's a really easy. It's not got a lot of paint colors, so we're going to get to work and we're going to paint. But first of all, we're going to paint this base piece red, so it'll match our main piece. I'm just using my finger along the edges to try to keep my edges as clean as possible, so that I don't have to do a lot of touch-up painting on them. And we'll set that piece aside. And then we're going to do the background of our main piece also in this same red. And as always, as you're doing any kind of painting, the more you can come from the center to the outside edges so that you never brush onto a piece of wood, the easier it'll be to keep your sides and your edges, clean and keep it looking sharp. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm working my way down, coming from the center down into each of these areas and off the edge with my brush, not letting my brush come back on the edge on the other side, which is why I'm doing this a little slower here. You want to always make sure that your brush works its way off as it goes, and it does as much as possible. At least there are sometimes when you can't do that, and that it doesn't, when you've got pieces like this where there's a gap and then another piece, you got to be careful not to come up on the next piece as an onward stroke. And this has lots of lines for placement, but they will show through. They've got a little bit of depth to them, so they will show through a regular coat of paint, or if you want even two. Red is one of those colors that sometimes needs a second coat, but I'm trying to make sure I get a good thick coat on it the first time, so hopefully I can avoid having to do a second one. If you want to save paint, you could do so by not worrying about trying to paint inside all these line areas, but especially on some of these words, that's hard because they're thin and you want to make sure you get all the area outside of them. So I usually just choose to paint, like inside the gingerbread man could be not painted, but it's just easier, I think, to go ahead and paint all of the background piece, so you don't have to worry about where your edges are and whether or not you got far enough down on your edge, out on your edges. It's just one of those things you kind of learn with time. Okay, there we've got our base painted, and then we have a few pieces that we need to paint that have the red on it, that are smaller pieces that go on there, and those they're small pieces, and normally I would probably use a sponge on them, but I have the brush wet and they're not that small, so I can be very careful, and I can use the edge of the brush to get them filled in without having to dirty up another small brush or a sponge. So I'm just being very careful in how I paint with this, because as you can see, this brush is way too big for these pieces, but I'm just kind of using a corner and an edge, trying to use that without making a mess. Okay, so then the next color I'm going to do is I'm going to do the gray for the little whisk here. There's not very much of that. I'm going to use a sponge for that. Like I said, there's just a little bit of that, so I'm just going to use my sponge, and you be careful along this edge here, right where I get up against that red, and then otherwise the sponge will work great to fill in the tops without going down in the holes between each of those little I don't know what you call those things, between each little piece. So we'll use our sponge here, and I am kind of more than tapping my sponge, I'm kind of pulling it, just because in this case they are all an upward thing, so I can get away with that. So that takes care of that. Now let's see. We're going to work our way down the rest of our pieces here. Okay, so these pieces here are all the pink color. So we're going to use our sponge to do those in this light pink. I'm going to load my sponge, and then as you can see, I'm tapping it to unload a whole lot of that paint. So I don't have it, it's not thick. There's not a thick layer of paint on it. That's what we want. We want just a really thin layer of paint, so it doesn't end up going down too far on our edges. And when we use this sponge method, and it's kind of like just tapping up and down, it will go on our edges some, but it won't go as much as a brush would if it was trying to do these kind of small pieces. It also will give us a really even drop on those edges, I guess is the best term for it, and therefore it'll look okay to leave them. We don't have to touch them up because it kept them nice and even. And as you can see, I am doing an initial coat and then going back to the ones I just did to kind of put an extra layer on, because this method does put a very thin layer of paint on them, which is nice, except that sometimes it means that a lot of time you have to go back and give it a second light coat also. These will dry really quick, so you can go back pretty quickly to do that second coat, and you can do as many little light coats as you need. That's one of the beauties of this method, is the coats are always nice and light. Now on this, I'm going to be a little thicker on my paint, and I'm going to use my sponge in more of a brush-like fashion because it's a bigger piece. And as you can see, this, with this method, you can get by with just makeup sponges. You can paint them all like this with just a makeup sponge. You don't have to have fancy brushes and different brushes for everything. You can just use the edges of makeup sponges. The biggest time that's a problem is if you have areas that are together on a piece. If it's not, individual pieces, then the sponges are a little harder to get those good lines with. But that's the only time I have trouble, when I use sponges to paint, and I do use sponges a lot. Okay, so we're going to let that dry. I'm going to let that dry for a few minutes. I'll come back to it because I'm going to put some dots on that bowl. I think I'm going to put some dots on the outside of the bowl. But first of all, I'm going to paint the rolling pin and the spoon a light brown so that they look wooden. Give them a little bit of texture, a little bit of extra color above just the, you could just leave them this way, but I don't usually like to do that. And I'm going to use, to keep that light color that I've got, that what I guess I should say uneven color that I have, that I want to keep that when I paint these, so that I get, you know, it looks like the wood. So what I'm going to do is use a wet wipe, and I'm going to just dip it in the paint and get a little bit on there, and then just smooth it around. It can go in any direction. It's okay no matter what direction you go in, because it's going to, what using the wet wipe does is keep it lighter. It gives you some more consistent color than you had with just the cut, and it gives it a little bit of the protective layer of the paint, but it also lets you see that grain, for lack of a better term, through it. These are MDF, they're not actual wood, so it's not really a wood grain, but it looks sort of like a wood grain, and it gives you that grainy look through the item that you're working on. And I didn't do the ends because I'm going to do those in a little bit different method. Now I'm going to give this bowl another coat. I don't like how it turned out. It needs it's not quite dark enough, so I'm going to give it another coat before we do our dots on it. So we'll give it its extra coat here. And then our other two bowls and our buttons, we're going to kind of do in a sagey green. So we're going to get those up here. In this case, I am going to use a brush because these two pieces are pretty large. So I'm going to use a mid-sized brush here and paint them because they'll paint better that way. If they were, you know, if I had a lot of little pieces that I needed to use the sponge on, I might just use the sponge on them, but I don't. I have these larger pieces, and so I'm going to use the brush on them. On these two pieces, I'm using the brush at a pretty good level, and you know, I just did the thing I told you not to do. I just went off the edge here. I went on the edge instead of off the edge there. And so I had a big glob of paint on my side. Clean that up. See, that's why you want to start in the middle of your piece and work your way out, so that you don't get that glob of paint on your edge. So if I do it this way and I come across and go out from there, that works much better. Again, I'm going to start in the middle and work my way out. The first coat, the first layer of a coat, I guess, because this is not really going to be two coats, it's two light layers. It doesn't matter what direction anything goes in. So I'm 100% working off edges and kind of working out in a circular fashion from the center of my bowl here. Now then, as I've gotten all of that done, I am going to use my brush to kind of even out and try to make sure that everything's going in the right direction. Any brush marks are. And then I'm going to keep my brush really light and kind of use it like a sponge here on these buttons. But I'm actually using the brush in that way. And it's a little thicker than it would be with a sponge, but it keeps you from dirtying up a sponge. So since I've already got the brush dirty, I'm going to do that. That works just fine. And then I have these two ends of the rolling pin. I want to make the handles look like they've been painted, so I'm gonna, I didn't do a line there when I cut it. I really should have, but that's okay. We're gonna just go, you know, just kind of draw a straight line across there and then cover our end to make it look like the end has been painted, but the middle is just the sealed wood. And we're going to do the same thing on this side. Again, we're going to try to make as straight a line as possible. Okay, so there's those. I got a little bit in those. I think I want to do a little bit more here. This is kind of streaky, so I'm going to kind of put another coat on to just kind of even it out. I just don't like the streaky that hat was looking. How streaky that was looking. Okay, that takes care of that color. And then we have our gingerbread color, and I'm using cinnamon color. It's a nice color that you use for gingerbread, I think. And in this case, I have no decoration. Well, his face, really have no decoration that is going to be not covered by something. So the only place I have to worry is on his face. And so I am going to use the sponge method on his face, just so that those pieces shine through a little better. As you can see, when you use the sponge method, it keeps it from going down in those engravings as much. If you get it down in those engravings too much, you can use an X-Acto knife to pop it out, but I think I'm good there. And then we'll get us another brush, and we're just going to apply our gingerbread color everywhere. So we're going to start here and work our way out. Like I said, we always work our way out. Work our way from our center point, and like there, I just got one across his mouth. So I'll show you. I made that. I filled that in too much, and I'll show you how to do it with an X-Acto knife. Just a second. You want to let it dry a little bit. You don't want it to be totally wet when you do the X-Acto knife, but you also don't want it to be totally dry. So, kind of got to let it dry a little bit, but not get completely set. Okay, so I'm just going to grab my X-Acto knife, and I'm just going to basically draw right through those pieces. So just drop it into that little channel, I guess, and let it draw along the line that it's already cut. I don't want to cut a new line, so I got to be gentle as to what I do. Let it draw basically, and the nose is just fine. Let it draw along that line that's already cut. And every little bit I'm pulling up and just pulling off any paint that's on my tip, because I don't want to get it too thick down in there. And there we go. You can see that you can now see his mouth clearly, which is what we want. We want that cut to be clear. I'll hold it up a little bit closer so you can see that you can now see his cut, his mouth really nice and clear. We're going to then just keep going with our paint in our area, the rest of the areas of his body. And again, I'm painting from the middle out to the edges. And in this case, with the cinnamon, it doesn't matter if I get some streaks, because, you know, the dough is not going to be perfect, would not be perfectly colored if you were using actually seeing dough. So I'm not too concerned about any streaks I might get. Just trying to keep my edges as clean as possible. And these little guys here, I'm going to just unload my brush as much as possible, but still have enough to fill them in so that I don't end up with a mess, but I don't have to get a sponge out. They're definitely a good one for sponge painting if you want to do the sponge painting, because they're very small, but they're large enough, and it's single color that, you know, I can, and there's no engraving on them. Okay, I think that's everything we need. Oh, I think on this bowl, I'm going to put some dots. I'm going to show you, and I have a stylus, but because I know that a lot of people don't, I'm going to, rather than use the stylus, I'm going to show you that you can just use, I'm just using the end of a small brush. And so I'm going to dip it in the red, and I've got it, I think I've got enough red over here to make this work. And then just kind of randomly put dots on my piece. And just randomly dot around on that bowl. I'm not real great at random, but I try. A little OCD for that, so mine end up being more in rows, but hopefully I can randomize them a little bit here. Just to give that bowl a little bit of character, because he's kind of in the middle with nothing on him. You do want to, when you're doing this, so you know, if you notice I'm getting a real thin one, and the reason is because I was touching the bottom of my palette when I dipped. See, there we go. You don't want to touch the bottom of your palette. As much as you can possibly not touch it, you don't want to touch the bottom of your palette, because when you touch the bottom of your palette, it unloads the tip of your brush. It just has the sides loaded then. So you want to try to not touch the bottom of your palette. And that'll give you a better load on your brush. I will tell you that this is something you gotta be careful with when you're doing these, because these will take longer to dry, and they will smudge if you're not careful. I have a bad tendency to smudge mine. So that's everything we need to paint. Let's get our paints all the way. And we're just going to start pulling our pieces off of our board here, because we're using our tape board, and laying them out here to the side so that we're ready to start assembling. Like I said, be very careful when you're fingering this one that has the dots on it, because of the fact that those dots are in no way dry at this point. So I'm kind of gently picking it up and laying it over there a little further out so that I don't have as much trouble with it. Away, and we'll get our piece back over here. Okay, and we're basically going to start at the bottom and work our way up. And normally I would glue as I go, but I'm not going to today because it'll take a little time to dry in between layers. So I'm just going to lay it out for you, and then I'm going to go back and glue it after the video. So I'm going to lay it out for you and make sure we get everything laid where it needs to lay on our piece. And as you can see, the little lines down here that you have just help you line up where you want the individual pieces to lay. And just want to line them up. Those lines are a little bit smaller than the cut piece, so you should be able to fully cover them without problem. Looks like I painted the wrong side of that one, so we'll just fix that real quick here. Have to let it dry a little bit before I stick it on there, but luckily our paint's not dry yet here. So this is something to kind of watch. I thought I had checked all of these before I laid them on here on my tape, but I guess I missed that one. Make sure you're painting the right side. There is not a definite difference in the burn from one side to the next usually. Depends on where they were laying on the board. There's a couple of spots that get a burn spot, but generally speaking, there's not a lot of difference from one side to the next. from the front to the back. So make sure you're painting what's the fronts of them so that they lay out correctly. Lay out all of our little details here while we wait on that to dry. He does not have pieces for his eyebrows. And so you can use a paintbrush, but I personally, on something that small, prefer to use I personally use Twill art pens, but I know some people like Pass, and some people like a couple of different brands, and it's not real important that you can use it. And then I'm just going to fill in where there's already lines. But to leave them open like that doesn't look right, so I'm filling them in like this. When you use a paint marker for this kind of thing, it works a little better and it comes out a little smoother than if you use a brush, unless you've got a steadier hand than I do. And I could draw over the top of those pieces, but I'm not going to. And as you can see as I'm playing here, these little squiggles do have an up and down, believe it or not. They're not perfectly equal, so they do have an up and down. And then we'll lay our dots are pretty dry, unless we press on really hard, and that's dry. And there we go. We've got, and if you your base should glue the two pieces together to make it stand up. But there you go. There's our Baking Spirits Bright, all finished, ready to go on our shelf. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and we'll come back soon to see what else we have to offer. There's a link in the comments for this file, as well as some other files that match the same theme.